Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will soon embark on a visit to Iran, a first by a Japanese leader for 40 years. The rare trip to the Middle East nation is considered to be a mediation mission to ease tensions between the United States and Iran. What messages will be delivered? What new turns will be brought to the U.S. Iran standoff? And how will the U.S. Japan alliance evolve with the new development of U.S. diplomacy? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Harvey Zordin, Senior Fellow of the Center for China and Globalization. We shall also speak to Takasato Watanabe, Professor Emeritus of Doshisha University in Kyoto, and Gamba Naderi, a columnist with Keihan International in Tehran. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Thank you, guys. Let me first of all go to Professor Watanabe. Since he's your Prime Minister, Mr. Shinzo Abe undertook this trip, the first of its kind in 40 years. What do you think of the importance, and do you think he's going to bring about a breakthrough for the U.S. diplomacy, despite the formidable presence of a very powerful aircraft carrier strike group in the Middle East?
No media here in Japan, and also intellectuals, including myself, they don't think that Mr. Abe's role will not be so big in this time, because there are two reasons. Mr. Abe wants to strengthen the ties with Mr. Trump himself, not with the United States as a nation. Second, Mr. Abe is facing the election of Upper House next month. He wants to give the good performance appearing to the people of Japan. So in any the angles, we don't foresee good result or a good achievement through the activities of Mr. Abe this time to Iran.
Harvey, neither China nor Russia has been invited by the Pentagon to undertake this mediation mission. Why do you think the Prime Minister would live up to the expectation of President Trump, who obviously doesn't want to have a war with the Persian state at this moment?
Well, I think there's several reasons. The Japanese are in a great position to serve as mediators because they've done business with Iran for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And they have an excellent relationship with post-World War II Iran as well, and with post-Iranian Revolution as well. Also, Prime Minister Abe is the host of the upcoming G20 in about 2 weeks or so. And as a consequence, I think that it would be a tremendous breakthrough if he could get both sides to agree to talk on the sidelines of the G20 and try to achieve some kind of a beginning of a discussion, because this is a very serious matter, and not only the fate of the region, but in some ways the fate of the world hang on its resolution.
Thank you very much, Harvey. Let me go to Iranian guest speaker. Hello. Do you think the Japanese could exercise credible leadership in navigating a course of finding a peaceful solution?
Well, it doesn't depend on Japan. I think it depends on reactions from Iran. I have talked to many lawmakers yesterday at the parliament. I also talked to the foreign ministry. They made it absolutely clear that many things are going to be discussed behind closed doors. So we might not have a communique or a press conference by Mr. Abe or his Iranian counterparts. So a lot of things are still not clear at the moment. But I can tell you one thing only. I think we know what has happened so far. We know how the U.S. backtracked on the nuclear deal, imposed sanctions, began threatening Iran with military, might in the Persian Gulf. But what we don't know is how Iran is supposed to answer and react now. I think the best option for the Iranian government and the leadership is to give the U.S. government the benefit of the doubt. Yes, the United States and Trump administration cannot be trusted, but what else are we supposed to do? I mean, something has to give away. Something has to give away, and this is a perfect excuse for Iran to give this kind of chance to Japan to do some kind of mediation. Yes, of course, we are going to also consult our allies.
Both sides, Washington and Tehran, need to keep level-headed at this defining moment of their relationship following the cancellation of the Iran nuclear deal. Now, January, I wonder if the two militaries, Persian and American, could act in a professional way when they have this head-on collision in the Persian waters.
Well, this is what we are all monitoring at the moment. If you ask me as a reporter here, I haven't seen any military dispatchments or troops to the Persian Gulf. I haven't seen Iran installing its missiles along the Persian Gulf waters. What I have heard so far is that the American naval authorities are telling us that so far the conducts on the part of the Iranian military and naval forces have been absolutely professional. So I don't think there will be some kind of military confrontation between these two regional rivals at the moment, but never say never again. We have to take this situation seriously. We need to talk to each other. We need to trust each other and give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. As your distinguished guest in Japan made it absolutely clear, the stakes are absolutely high for each and everyone in this particular gambit.
Let me go back to Harvey Zodin. Harvey, what do you think of the capability, the combat capability of the Persian state? Do you think they are ready to take punches from Washington?
I don't think they're ready to take punches. They may not ultimately win, but they can make a mess of the situation in the region, and that's troublesome. What worries me about this, as also what worries me about the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, is that it's okay to do those cruises. It's okay for the Abraham Lincoln to be in the Persian Gulf, but it's not okay to have some accident, something unintended consequences, because those could spiral out of control. What I see happening right now is kind of a dance, a charade between the two sides, trying to exercise some kind of brinksmanship and poking each other in the eye, but not going so far as to blinding each side, and not going so far as to having an armed conflict. But there is always the possibility of unintended consequences, and that worries me.
Marine General Frank McKenzie, head of the Central Command, says Saturday seems to have caused Iran to tinker with its preparation for potential attacks. Now, the issue, I'm afraid, Professor Watanabe, is do you believe Prime Minister Abe is clearly aware of the repercussions, the consequences? Now, his father went to the Middle East as a special envoy during the Iran-Iraq war, but do you think Prime Minister Abe keep this in mind and will fulfill what his father has done?
His father was the pacifist. I once met him and had a talk on those many things. But Mr. Abe, he is the player only in the drama, and he doesn't know so much about the power balance, real power balance of the world. And he wants to be the friendly to Mr. Trump, and Mr. Trump wants to keep the Israel only, and also he wants to keep some tension in the Middle East, because he wants to, you see, contribute himself to the increase of the military budget in that region. So in those factors clearly show that the activity which will be done this time by Mr. Abe is nearly useless in the actual political dynamic.
Harvey, I wonder if, say, other heavyweight players in the Middle East, such as Israel, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, which is staging a sectarian war with the Shiite majority countries in the Middle East. I wonder if these guys could also exercise enormous influence in shaping the future of the Middle East. Harvey, what are your thoughts on, for example, a phone call that Prime Minister Netanyahu had with his Japanese counterpart ahead of the trip that the Japanese leader took?
I think that Japan is in a special situation here because they're in the position of honest broker. They don't have to be on one side or the other. They are in a position of being friends of both countries. You saw how much Prime Minister Abe has tried to make friends with Trump with limited success, but maybe he has the best relationship of any foreign leader. So I think he wants to please President Trump. At the same time, 90% of Japan's energy comes from the Middle East, and this is even more acute after the Fukushima nuclear disaster. And so Prime Minister Abe has to do a balance. If you talk about Israel, if you talk about Turkey or some of the other countries in the region, they're players. They have axes to grind. So I think that the best person to make a phone call, or better yet, to meet, as he will tomorrow, with the Iranians is the Japanese Prime Minister.
All diplomatic maneuvers are viewed as an extension of domestic politics. Now, in the immediate aftermath of the domestic elections in Israel, Gamba, I wonder if you have followed the domestic developments of Tel Aviv. To what degree do you think the tough attitude of Prime Minister Netanyahu would help consolidate his fragile coalition government at home?
Well, this is all about, regional politics, and of course, as your distinguished guest made it absolutely clear, winning votes. The problem with us and the United States is not a problem between Iran and the United States. It's the problem of meddling by other regional players like Saudi Arabia and Israel. These are the forces that prevent the Trump administration to somehow begin dialogue, constructive dialogue with Iran. They are also the same forces that force Trump to walk out of the nuclear deal, send his warships to the Persian Gulf, and impose crippling sanctions on Iran. So since these are Iran's rivals and enemies, it is very difficult for Trump to sit at the same negotiating tables with Iran without negating and antagonizing his regional allies, Saudi Arabia and Israel. So if Iran wants to somehow negotiate with the United States and get something tangible out, it has no choice but to normalize its relations with Saudi Arabia and Israel as well. The problem is that Iran doesn't recognize Israel, and as long as this foreign policy is on the table, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for Iran to somehow reach an understanding with the United States. So never underestimate America's regional allies, because they are the ones that are actually calling the shots and arm twisting President Trump and his men at the White House.
Few would underestimate the might of other heavyweight regional players such as Saudi Arabia and Israel. Perhaps the only politician, or I would say a religious leader like Grand Ayatollah Khamenei would be the only man lurking behind the whole scenario. But you are watching dialogue with Harvey Zordin, senior fellow with the Center for China and Globalization. We're also talking to Professor Takasato Watanabe and Mr. Gamba Nadre, a columnist with Kayhan International in Tehran. We are discussing conundrum in the Middle East, geopolitical as well as ramifications and the impact, if any, of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's upcoming visit to the Middle East. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Guys, do you think Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will make a serious difference?
He could. I think both sides are looking for an opportunity at least to have a conversation about this, because it's stalemated, because the U.S. has upped the ante, because recently Iran has also upped the ante with a threat by June 7th to start more enrichment and to start more centrifuges spinning. So I think it's very important to have an opportunity, and I think that the time schedule has aligned, like I said, because Japan is the host of the G20. It could be a good opportunity for a short but important meeting between the Iranian leaders and President Trump and his advisors, who are more hawkish than he is, Bolton and Secretary of State Pompeo.
Harvey, are you actually aware of the conflicting messages that President Trump delivers these days? For example, on the one hand, he's so concerned with the process of denuclearization in the divided Korean Peninsula. On the other hand, he called off, in fact, suspended the intermediate range nuclear forces with Russia that was reached during the Cold War. But this time around, he also canceled the Iran nuclear deal. So what does he actually want by the end of the day?
Well, conflicting messages, is that something new from our president? I don't think so. What I think it is, in part, is that he's getting pulled by one side, which are his hawkish advisors, and by the Prime Minister, Prime Minister Abe, and on the other, to some extent, by Europe, who would like to continue and also perhaps revisit the agreement, the JCPOA. So I think there's a tug of war going on here, and it's interesting because we don't know the outcome. We do know that President Trump seems to be souring on John Bolton, his hawkish leader. And the president said recently that if he had listened to Bolton, he'd be in 4 wars at the same time. So Trump is talking a good game and talking and playing hardball, but he doesn't want a war. So I think that this is part of the situation, and I think you saw the same scenario with North Korea, actually, fire and fury and all that. But in the end, the two leaders are friends, and even though North Korea is continuing to militarize their nuclear stockpile and so on, Trump pays it no mind.
With escalation of a nuclear race, which is a strong possibility in the Middle East between the Saudis and the Persian state, I think Europeans are not very happy. They would bear the first casualty should any of such hostile acts take place in the Middle East. They are especially angry. I mean, European politicians in Brussels were particularly angry after President Trump decided to reverse the Iran nuclear deal, and the European companies were not allowed by the domestic law of the U.S. to do deals with Iran. So what do you think of the reactions from Brussels?
I think the reactions are obviously very negative towards the U.S. For some reason, President Trump America had many allies, but President Trump is in the process of prying them away from United States, ally by ally. This seems to be his continual process. So no, the Europeans are not happy about this, and they're the ones who are trying to stay in the agreement. It's very difficult without the United States. They're the ones who've actually passed legislation that holds EU persons, both corporate and individual, free from United States judgments against them for violating the JCPOA or violating the U.S. sanctions, actually. And so I think there's a great divide here. The Foreign Minister of Germany is on record as saying they'd like to talk, but they don't want a less-for-less agreement. They want to maybe have a more robust agreement. So if anything, they want to do more.
It's very difficult, Professor Watanabe, for Japan not to take sides at this defining moment, given the fact that Japan remains an ally since the end of the Second World War of the United States. And therefore, what do you think of the importance of consulting Europeans before Prime Minister Shinzo Abe undertook this journey of mending fence with Tehran?
To talk with European leaders, very important, and also some other leaders of the world are very important. But as you may see, the result of the G20 economic finance ministers and heads of the national banks meeting of last week on the 8th and 9th of this month, there were not good results because the tension between the United States and China, those two great leaders of the world in every meaning, could not agree with each other so much, I dare say. So Japan's role is very small, but the mission to go to, you see, Iran is good, okay? It is a part of the role of the Japan should do, but it is not so, you see, good for us to expect so much from Mr. Abe's, you see, visit to Iran this time.
Yeah, Japan does want to come across as a nice guy, an honest broker. However, as you said wisely, Japan is not so important as a formidable geopolitical power since the end of the Second World War. Now, to my knowledge, recently, a kind of a 2+2 meeting took place between Russia and Japan. Foreign Minister and Defense Minister of the two countries did converge to discuss what could be done about Iran. Now, could you brief us on the deliverables coming out of this meeting for reconciliation?
Japan, you see, has been very in the good relations with the United States. It is true, but frankly speaking, Japanese, you see, feel that the United States is facing only the Europe and some, you see, other strong nations, and also Mr. Trump's case, his main concern is, in the case of the Middle East, how to keep the Israel as it is. Of course, you see, he thinks that Russia is very important, and France, Germany, UK, very important. However, in his idea, how to keep his position good for his own sake, this is true. The same is true for Mr. Abe. So gradually, of course, the world is proceeding for the better direction, but whether or not this Mr. Abe's role is very big this time, we don't think it is so big.
Those who are serious about history are familiar with why the Second World War or the Pacific War had broken out between Washington and Tokyo. It's a lot about the energy security. This island nation of Japan was clearly aware of. This time around, would you tell us more about how Prime Minister Shinzo Abe would sustain your lifeline of energy supply from the Middle East, Russia, or rather Tokyo would turn to Washington for much of the energy cooperation after overseas multinationals were ordered by Washington not to deal with Iran, which is one of the major oil-rich countries in the world.
More than half of the energy resources, especially petroleum, is coming from the Middle East. In case of Japan, it is true. And Iran is one of the major exporters, including also some other nations like Saudi Arabia. But Japan is afraid of some war or war-like atmosphere or circumstances in the Middle East area to import the oil. This is the one thing. And the other thing is that for the politicians, they want to play on the surface of the world political dynamics. They don't know, you see, so much about the actual power politics, because Japan is not good at diplomacy. And finally, in every case, Japan would like to depend on the United States after the war, as you have mentioned.
Now, Harvey, I know you have been very critical of your president, Donald Trump, despite the fact that he's been elected into the White House. But looking back in hindsight wisdom, do you have any benefits of doubt with regard to the unilateral moves by the Pentagon, the White House, in reversing your policy that President Obama adopted to improve a relationship with the Persian state?
I think it's a huge mistake to try to divorce the countries. I think it was a huge mistake to walk out of this Iranian deal. Why? Of course, as President Trump has said, the deal's not perfect. It's finite in time. It doesn't deal with the missiles and delivery systems. But at least it contained the situation for a long time so that cooler heads might prevail in the future and that discussions could happen. So I think President Trump has been wrong all the way around.
Indeed. Thank you so much, everybody who's involved in this discussion about the trip by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to Tehran. Indeed, most observers, the Chinese and foreign alike, have been left deeply puzzled as to why Washington decides to antagonize almost all major powers on all fronts at the same time. And, well, that's one of the big myths that we are facing today. I'll bring you guys back for more of such discussions on what the future might be like. Thank you so much for being with us. See you next time. Goodbye.